So what's happening in Israel is that when you take a look at poverty line or inequality inside of Israel, you see two very, very different stories. And the two stories, one of them relates to what's known as market income, and the other one relates to disposable income. And then when you take a look at market income, so you're talking about market income, you're talking about the gross wage that you're getting before you pay taxes and before any kind of transfer payments are received from the government. When you take a look at market income, well, Israel isn't actually doing that differently than the OECD. Most of the countries in the OECD are doing, and when you define the poverty line the way it's defined in Israel, which is half of the median wage, then you find that Israel looks like it's doing okay. But when you now go and you take a look at disposable income, things look very, very different. And take a look at disposable income, and you compare it for all the different OECD countries, then Israel is actually the worst of all the OECD countries with respect to the percentage below the poverty line. We know that this is coming to a large extent from some specific populations, but that doesn't change the fact that Israel has a very large percentage who are below this poverty line. So then the question is, what's happening? How do you have, on the one hand, when you look at market income, one story, and when you look at disposable income, you get a very, very different story. And the answer is basically an issue of, to some extent, an issue of choice. Now, there's a relationship between tax revenues and public expenditure. We all know that the more taxes you take in, the more you can spend. Well, Israel, different countries place themselves in different places along this scale. And you take a look at Denmark. Denmark is taking, on average, 48% of every dollar that's being earned in Denmark is going into the government's pocket and being used in order to be able to do all kinds of services that the government gives. You take a look at Mexico, and it's all the way down to about 19%. Israel has chosen to place itself towards the low end. Israel, the average tax being paid by consumers, not the marginal tax, the average tax being paid, is 29%. That's actually significantly lower than what's happening in most of the OECD countries. And the thing is that when you're not taking much money in taxes, you're also not able to spend that much money on trying to improve issues, including the issue of poverty. So to some extent, you have to think about the fact that part of what's needed in order to really solve the problem is you're going to have to increase the tax base. You're going to have to increase the amount of taxes that are being taken in. You need more money in order to be able to spend more money. So that's not obviously the answer to all the problems, but that's at least something that you have to keep in mind, that there is a certain choice here. The choice is to be at the low end. And this isn't just something I'm saying that it's just a choice, because take a look when this happened. So here are a bunch of different OECD countries. Now take a look at Israel. Well, Israel was riding along the average, and then there were changes, tax changes in 2007, where there was a decision to lower the tax rates. And when they lowered the tax rates, they lowered themselves below what's happening in most of the other countries. And as a result, the revenues that they have in order to be able to improve the situation diminished. They just didn't have the ability to do it. So what I want to do now is I want to show you a few different. So this is the income side. Just take a look at how that has affected different populations. So if you take a look at the deciles here, going from the first decile to the 10th decile, the population that had the biggest benefit percentage-wise, not shekel-wise, but percentage-wise, was the lowest decile. There was the negative income tax. There were all kinds of changes that were put in that helped them very, very much. And they've gained almost 9% of their income. Their taxes went down. The next group that made the most was actually the highest centiles. And that actually makes a lot of sense, because when you're lowering income taxes, well, the people you're helping are the people who are paying the income taxes. And most of the income taxes are being paid by the wealthy. They're certainly not being paid by the first 5 deciles. And therefore, their benefit is relatively low. But the highest deciles are actually making the most here, more than anybody else is making. They're paying the most, and they're getting the most benefit from the decrease. Let's take a look at expenditures. So what's happened with expenditures, taking a look at welfare expenditures have been increasing over time. But if you take a look at that as a percentage of government expenditures, it's been fairly constant since about 2003, 2004. Okay, they haven't been changing as a percentage of total expenditures. That hasn't changed very much. Take a look at the subcategories of that. So the interesting subcategories are these two. On the one hand, Israel's becoming older. They have more people they have to support, more elderly they have to support. The longevity in Israel is very, very long compared to other countries. And on the other hand, there's been a very, very sharp decrease in child allowances. Now, this is again a decision to lower child allowances taken in 2003. And the purpose of that decision was trying to get certain populations, Haredi men in particular, and Haredim in general, into the workforce more than they were. These were populations that were basically financing themselves on government transfers. A lot of it was child allowances. They had very, very large families. And therefore, in order to get them into the workforce, this was taken away, and therefore they felt they had to get into the workforce in order to be able to earn a living. It worked to a certain extent. Just to take a look at the number of people, you can see that there are far more elderly than there used to be. And in fact, the largest percentage increases among the elderly. And there's also a large increase in the number of children in Israel. Israel is one of the few countries that actually more than replaces itself. The average birth rate in Israel is about 3 per family. When you take a look, you need about 2.1 in order to duplicate yourself. And most of the OECD countries are there or well below that. Okay, so Israel is one of the only countries that's not doing that's growing. And by the way, lest you think that's only among the Haredi and Arab populations, that's not the case. It's among all the populations. The secular populations, the Haredi and Arab populations are actually lowering, their fertility is getting smaller, and for the secular populations, it's getting bigger. Taking a look at the elderly, this is the amount being spent per person. Now, these are in constant prices. So it's not just that we have more elderly, more is being given to the elderly as time goes on. So when you saw that increase in the amount being spent on welfare, it's a combination of both having more elderly and also spending more per person. Taking a look at a couple other categories, so this is healthcare. So this is a very interesting graph. You can see the difference between the OECD and the US, first of all. That the OECD, the government tends to supply more of the healthcare, while in the US, this is before Obamacare, while in the US, it tended to be more people providing for themselves, okay, less social programs. And Israel was actually in between. But what you see is that decrease in Israel. That decrease in Israel is a little bit misleading. And what's actually happening there is not that the government is spending less, it's that people are spending more. People are actually buying more and more insurance programs for themselves, and they're buying the same insurance 4 or 5 times because they don't really understand that they're doing that. And they're spending a fortune of money on their own health, and a lot of it is really wasted money. In fact, there are all kinds of laws now they're talking about in order to try to change that. But so what you're seeing here is an increase in in private spending rather than a decrease in public spending. Take a look at education. Education is very interesting. This is what's happened from 2000 to 2014. There's going to be an exam on these numbers later, by the way. If you take a look at what's happened, so I took away the millions. Okay, what you've got here, if you've got that going from 2000 to 2014, we've gone up from 27 billion shekel being spent on education up to 43. That's an increase of 1.6% a year. That's a significant increase. If you go on and you take a look at it on a per student basis, that's also a very, very significant increase. And if you take a look on a percentage basis, well, the government is spending 11% of its expenditures on education rather than 9%. In other words, they've been boosting up the amount being spent on education. There's always room for more. There's always room for more in everything. But certainly this is a good direction. So now what I'm going to do is going to break it down a little bit. And this is what this chapter that Chaim Blech actually wrote. He goes and he's taking a look at different populations. So, by the way, stop me when I need to be stopped. Okay, just let me know. Take a look at working ages. Now, working ages I'm going to define here in a bit of a strange way. Working ages are defined 15 to 59. The reason I'm stopping working ages at the age of 59 is so that you can be able to compare over different countries in the OECD. Different countries have different retirement ages. And therefore, in order to be able to make it comparable across the different countries, we've stopped this study at 59. You can stop it at any age that you want to stop it. It doesn't really matter. It's not going to change the basic story. So we're only taking a look at those who were the head of the household is 59 or under. And we're taking a look at the same graph as before. And Israel actually is doing a little bit worse than the OECD, but not a whole lot worse when you're talking to look at market income. Okay, not a whole lot worse, but still doing worse. Take a look at disposable income. You're back to the same story we were at before. When you go to disposable income, Israel is actually doing worse than everybody else. The US is a close second. but those are the two countries that are doing the worst in that situation. Break it down according to populations, because obviously a big part of the story is the different populations. So take a look what was happening in 2002, 2003. You had, well, it's natural to be drawn to the all the way to the left of the graph to the Haredi population, because we know that they act differently than the non-Haredi population. And of course the Arab population is there. The Haredi population actually has the most poverty, but they also have the lowest, the lowest percentage who are actually working, lowest employment rates. Going to the next year, 2005, 2006, it's gotten even worse for the Haredi population. And now if you go on to 2010, 2011, well, those cuts are now taking effect. Okay, those cuts in child allowances have actually lowered, among the Haredi population, lowered the percentage below the poverty line. More people are getting out there and working. Okay, let's go on to what's happened to the number of wage earners. So here, what's in this graph is in 2003, the number of wage earners per family. So you had 28.5% where nobody in the family was working at all. That's a very large percentage. 34.5% in which there was only one member of one person from the couple was working, and 30% where you had 37% with two or more wage earners. Going over to 2011, you can see that there are far fewer families with no wage earners, fewer families with only one wage earner, and a lot of people, wherever they've moved to two wage earners or three wage earners. And this is basically the result of that child allowance cut. This is people getting into the labor force. You had an improvement over that period in all groups. Every group is doing better in 2010, 2011 than they were in 2002, 2003. Men, women, Haredi, Arab Israelis, and non-Haredi Jews. There's more work among everybody. Everybody's getting out to the labor force more than they were. Comparing to the OECD, so if you take a look in 2002, 2003, then Israel, for men, had a much lower employment rate than the OECD. And for women, it was still lower, but not a lot lower. Go over to 2010, 2011, and the men have almost caught up, and the women have completely caught up. So the employment situation is actually quite good, quite reasonable. Going over to families with wage earners from 15 to 59. Now, the reason I want to show you this graph is to show you to be wary of statistics, at least know what it is that you're seeing when you see statistics. So I'm going to show you this really pretty graph over here, which has lots of lines, and it's just different countries over time showing what percentage are below the poverty rate, below the poverty line. And I'm not showing you Israel there yet. And what's happened in Israel is the following. I mean, that's pretty wow. I mean, when I took a look at that at first, I said, what's going on here? And the answer is actually surprising. It's not what you think is going on. Let's go back to that change in 2003, the child allowances. When you go back to the situation in 2003, the child allowances, well, more people got into the labor force, right? Well, that should be lowering the poverty rates. Why is it raising the poverty rates? And the answer is that these people who are coming into the labor force, for the most part, are the Haredi men who have had very, very little training. They don't know math, they don't know English, they don't have any real good marketable skills, and they're coming in at minimal wages. When they're coming in at minimal wages, they're coming in below the poverty line. Well, beforehand, in earlier years, they weren't in the numerator or the denominator. They weren't in there because we're only talking about wage earners, families with wage earners. They weren't a family with wage earners. They're becoming a family with wage earners below the poverty line, so therefore they're actually increasing the poverty level. So it just shows you need to be careful when you're looking at this to figure out what's going on. This is actually, it looks terrible, but it's actually what's behind it is something that we were trying to get more people out into the labor force. We're getting what we wanted, but it makes these numbers look much worse. Okay, so you got to be careful and think about what numbers you're looking at. Taking a look at how this affected the different populations. So at first the poverty rates went up a lot for Haredim in particular because they were suddenly not getting that money. They weren't getting the money from the government, and therefore, even if they went out to the labor force, they weren't earning enough to go up above the poverty line. But it's been going down for them. Okay, it's been going up for the Arab population. It's been going down for the Haredim because they're getting out and they're earning more and they're making themselves better off. This is going to be, I think, my final graph, or two final graphs, talking about retirement group. So for the retirement ages, Israel is actually doing really great if you take a look at market income. I mean, with respect to below the poverty line, this is really great. It looks fantastic. There's such a relatively low percentage below the poverty line, but you got to remember that that means that Israelis are working to a much later age. And that's part of what's going on here, is that Israelis are working to a later age because to some extent they have to work to a later age. So therefore, is it good news or bad news? I don't know. You know, you can make your own decision whether that's good news or bad news. When you take a look at disposable income, well, there's worse. You know, Korea's way up there, and Australia is worse than Israel, so is Switzerland. But Israel is not doing well, okay? And the poverty rate is still about 20%. And that's about it. Thank you very much.